I'm Dave Randle, and I work with students to transform the world through sustainable tourism. Well, I got started in sustainability at the very first Earth Day in 1970. I was fortunate to work with leading experts on sustainability from around the world, and was one of the 6 leaders of the 150-person global environment team at the Earth Summit. So I have a lot of personal experience and background, and I've lived in diverse tourism settings. I grew up in Southern California, but I also lived in the little town of Kanab, Utah, surrounded by national parks, Bryce, Zion, the Grand Canyon, Lake Powell recreation area. I've consulted with a major tourism ski and summer resort. So I've seen tourism from many different perspectives. And so that was really kind of a transforming, life-changing event for me, because it really showed me that I had a real passion to be involved with environmental issues. Sustainable tourism is the process of living in a way that preserves the opportunities for future generations. For example, we're at Anna Marie Island, specifically on Pine Avenue, also known as the greenest little main street in America. All of the businesses have come together to beautify the city. The restaurants even take the herbs and spices they grow out of these gardens right into their restaurants. We have a separate program here with the Cortez Fishing Village to promote sustainable seafood. We have a solar business district powered 100% net zero energy with solar energy. Tourism could be one of the best allies for addressing issues like climate change, or it could be one of the worst enemies. If tourism is the fastest growing industry in the world and we do not do it more sustainably, we're going to exacerbate an already serious problem where things like sea level rise, different changes in rain cycles and droughts, depletion of food resources, seafood, all of these could be major impacts that will impact the tourism industry if we do not do this right. Tourism has more leverage to change the world than any single industry. There's just so much going on here, and students have the opportunity to be part of it and to experience it as part of our program. At USF, we are pioneering and networking on a global level in unique ways in the world.
Attached to those 30 minutes.
Wow, it's really great to be here. I'm so excited to have this opportunity to share a little bit with you today. If somebody could flip on my program, we'll get started here. Hello, tech people. There it goes. Great. So, one of the things that's said in my bio is the college I went to, the graduate school, and my doctorate, but it didn't tell you which high school I went to. And why is the high school important, what I went to? The high school I went to, La Cañada, is right next to NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And I was there in this midst of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Caltech, NASA complex, because my father was heading up in the 60s what was called the NASA Future Projects Team. NASA is known in America anyway as a futuristic organization, and yet they realized that every culture stagnates unless they find ways to think into the future. So they literally created a team of 23 scientists and engineers from around the country to propose projects to help NASA to think into the future. And as you can see, this magazine, one of the first projects they proposed was made the cover of Astronautics and Aeronautics magazine. It was a spaceship that once it got into outer space would unfold into solar panels and propel itself with solar energy all the way to Jupiter. This project was rejected by NASA because at the time they said solar had no future. So sometimes the future teams get a little ahead of the curve in that regard. But another project they did fund was the Mariner 10, launched in 1973 with a mission to Venus with the release of a capsule to the surface before going on a flyby to Mercury. and it was the first mission ever to use the gravity assist of one planet to reach another. And that became critical for the next project that was funded, which was called the Grand Tour, later renamed the Voyager mission, where they used a gravitational assist with every planet in the solar system. The Voyager is now the only spacecraft ever to leave our solar system and to travel into interstellar space, which it is doing currently, and it made that transition about a year ago, even though it was launched back in the 70s. Now, at the time, those designs were far beyond any machines that had ever been done to reach the Moon, Venus, and Mars, and was the most complex unmanned machine ever designed, and still to this day, one of the most successful missions that NASA has ever undertaken. And there's many lessons we can learn from this team that really do apply to tourism gastronomy. First of all, we have the potential to do things we haven't done and to do things in new ways. Second, we can build on the success to do even greater things. Third, that thinking outside the box, or in their case, thinking outside the solar system, will attract better quality personnel, more creative employees. And fourth, our success in the future needs planning for the future. So, in my short time, I want to give you a little bit of a taste of the grand tour of the Anthropocene that is informing our need to think in the future, the challenges of our planetary boundaries, the values chain and governance strategies we might be thinking of, and some of the best practice. And while I'm presenting this, I invite each of you to think of yourself as a member of a future team and how you would take what you're doing into a project for the future. Choosing the future we want is our choice. We can choose our future rather than let it just happen to us. So welcome to the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene is still debated by scientists. Some say we're there and have been for a long time. Others say we're still approaching it. But let me give you some evidence of why I think we're already there and have been for some time. The Anthropocene is that situation where humans have more impact on the planet than any other species or life form, and without their cooperation, the Earth can no longer right itself when catastrophes or disasters happen. And so I want to map out a little bit of the scope of that, starting with the fact that we now have 7.2 billion people on the Earth. That population is not evenly distributed. About a third of those people are in just two countries, India and China. And our food supply is not evenly distributed, as we heard in previous presentations this conference. 75% of the Earth's land surface outside of the ice sheets is now managed by human beings, 75%. And 40% of the Earth's land is now used for agriculture. And as population increases, demand for food has skyrocketed. And you can see the light shaded greens are the less productive agricultural, the darker shaded are the more productive. And we have depleted our best agricultural land, raising the challenge even more. 50% of our forests are gone, which is the most critical issue we're facing for land use changes. And most of that has been the result of creating more agricultural lands. And probably one of the saddest statistics is that extinction rates are now 100 to 1,000 times greater than nature intended. And you can argue, is it only 100 times or is it 1,000? I would argue in either case, it's a bad situation. We're approaching the same levels of extinction as we had in the age of the dinosaurs. And only 10% of the world's land is protected. Many areas that are, quote, legally protected, however, lack the necessary enforcement, so the protection is questionable. So we have a sustainable tourism observatory, part of the UNWTO system, and we have a program that we've developed to try to research some futuristic ideas and changes that I want to share with you. And we developed a focus on marine environment and coastal habitat areas because that's where most of tourism is. And our program has been actively engaged in ways to protect the oceans and coastal habitat, with the tourism industry being a primary and sometimes lead partner in those areas. This is a map of where our observatory is, so you can see we have a lot of coastal habitat, marine environment we're working forward. And it includes 10 different communities, very diverse and different in many ways. We've also been working with the Walt Disney Company to develop strategies that they've successfully done, that they have demonstrated can be done at a bed and breakfast level all the way up to a theme park level like they do, and they have shown to be cost effective. How cost effective? That's part of the research we're doing in small applications. But in their case, by implementing these 12 strategies just at Walt Disney World, not in Florida, not the whole company, they're saving $37 million a year in operating costs. And it has to do with improving design, mass transit, water conservation, improving waste management, reducing energy, promoting local, organic, hydroponic foods, promoting sustainable seafood, protecting coastal habitat and cultural heritage, reducing the use of plastics, clean marina initiatives, education, and planning, policy, and management. We've chosen this area not only because we live there, but because the oceans are facing mass extinction themselves. Probably one of the most threatening is ocean acidification. This graph shows what the ocean looks like at 375 parts per million, 450 to 500, and 500. The healthy level is 350. We're currently, last year for the first time, over 400, and 2 weeks ago we had a week where it went to 410. So we are in very serious trouble. Along with that, we have many planetary boundaries identified by the University of Stockholm Resilience Center in Stockholm, Sweden. And these include ocean acidification, ozone depletion, climate change, nitrogen phosphorus loading, biodiversity, aerosol loading, and chemical pollution. And we've developed a model based on the global sustainable tourism criteria, pillars of sustainable management, social and economic benefits, cultural heritage, and environmental stewardship, to design social structures that are sustainable using those 12 strategies to create safe and just space for humanity and just and sustainable economic development within the limitations of these 12 planetary boundaries. That's really what the work of our observatory is about. I don't have time to share all of these boundaries with you today, but let me focus on the three that are most directly related to gastronomy, that being, or the four rather, ocean acidification and climate change, the nitrogen cycle, and the rate of biodiversity loss, and share with you some best practices that we're aware of. Climate change and ocean acidification are really very strongly related because they both have to do with having too much CO2 in the atmosphere. Now, I know that's a hot topic in many parts of the world, but it's something that we need to address. It would allow us the opportunities for energy independence, preserving rainforests, sustainability, green jobs, livable cities, renewables, clean air, water, healthy children, etc. Of course, there are some politicians that are worried that it might be a big hoax and we can end up creating a better world for nothing. But I think we need to go forward just the same. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization reports that our diets, especially meats, may cause more CO2 than industry or transportation. Food production is one of the greatest sources of greenhouse gas emissions, including the emissions from animals, the fertilizer use, the transport of the food, and the deforestation to develop the cropland. And one of the things that we often overlook is the buildings that we have our food programs, our restaurants, and so forth in are not always the most sustainable, and we can do a lot more. This is a dome home in Florida that was created with a FEMA grant, and these buildings are 100% tornado-proof, earthquake-proof, insect-proof, fire-proof. They're not 100% hurricane-proof, but they can withstand hurricanes up to 300 miles an hour. And this particular house took a direct hit by Hurricane Ivan, and you can see what happened to the neighbors next door in the bottom picture, and yet they were unscathed. The cost of this kind of construction is the same as conventional construction up to about 2,000 square feet. After that, it's exponentially less. To give one illustration, a church that was wiped out in a hurricane in Alabama sent out bids. They got 3 conventional bids at 3.8, 4.1, and 4.2 million. This construction came in at 2 million, half the cost. So there's a tremendous opportunity. Belize has the Xanadu Resort. They developed the whole resort using this construction, and they took a direct hit with Hurricane Keith. And not only were they not damaged, they literally saved the lives of many people in the community that had nowhere else to go. The Atlantis Hotel in Paradise Island, Bahamas, used this construction for a restaurant, knowing that it was one of the more vulnerable places for storms and hurricanes, and it turned out to be a very interesting attraction. There are some parts of the world where the climate is already increasing in temperatures. They're thinking of creating shell environments to climatize the areas so they can still operate on a year-round basis. And this idea, I don't think has happened, it was proposed, interested me. They envisioned creating a space lab restaurant where you would literally be viewing outer space in real time, the same way that the space lab is seeing that view as you're enjoying your dining experience. So there's a lot of futuristic ideas that people have in terms of building designs. Transportation systems are another way we can reduce our carbon emissions in our programs. One of the interesting strategies the Walt Disney Company has taken in Florida, they've worked out an agreement with the TSA security people that they will literally go and pick up your luggage for you. When you arrive in the plane, you just get on a shuttle, your luggage is delivered to your room so you can start enjoying things. And this is saving about 11 million metric tons of carbon per year as a result. On a lower tech side, Cuba has encouraged transportation. The Malecom Walkway is 7 miles of the whole Havana city. You can walk that to get to anywhere in the city. They're using bicycle and horse-drawn taxis, and they have pedestrian-friendly villages. And there's many energy options that we consider as well. Some best practices, the Walt Disney Company in 2008 set a goal to become a net carbon zero company by self-imposing a carbon tax on all their business units and purchasing carbon offsets and putting the money back into more efficiency. Paradise Bay Villas in Grenada has gone a step further. They will give all guests carbon offsets for their flights, as well as whatever they do with local transportation while they're visiting that resort. Tourism has incentive to utilize renewable energy and provide reliable energy for their guests, and the consequences of not doing so can seriously impact the business. Some other best practices include the Tiamo Resort in the Bahamas, providing 100% of their energy. And I wanted to mention Paradise Villas not only has the extra step with carbon credits, they deliberately produced 150% of the energy they needed, figuring that they were increasing the development in the community and they wanted to compensate for that, so they give back that energy to the community. And the state of Hawaii is committed by 2045, the entire state of those islands will be 100% renewable energy. So there's many programs and models already underway. Another simple one for tropical climates particularly is simply coating your roof white. Doing so will conserve 20% of the energy, according to Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories in California. But it doesn't limit itself to just tropical climates. They're also doing this in New York City and getting close to the same results. And the Walt Disney Company, they measure their direct emissions, their non-direct emissions. They tax every one of their business units. They have all the theme parks around the world. They have the cruise lines. They have the resorts. They have the movie industry. They have ABC News. They have ESPN. They're the largest children's publisher in the world. Every one of those units gets taxed, and that money goes in to either becoming more efficient or carbon offsets. And the interesting thing, when I first presented this at the United Nations at the UNDPI conference, there was debate at the time we were still forming the SDGs, and the question was raised, is 10% reduction really realistic? Well, here's a company that did 50% in 5 years, and they've now set a goal to do the next 50% by 2020. And how significant is that? Well, let me put it in terms of size. The Walt Disney Company, we're at a nation that has enough revenues every year to be more than all but 42 countries of the world. So it's a huge demonstration project. And they have many different ways. They do energy efficiency, and they are continuing to look at ways to increase that. Just by switching to Energy Star appliances alone, they have enough to power the entire theme park of the animal kingdom. And they're using the cooking grease from the restaurants to power these steamships, trains, and trams, and they offload the cooking oil from the cruise ships to generate the Castaway Key Island that they have. By switching to LED lights, they're powering the holiday display of their castle with the equivalent of only 12 microwave ovens. And they use lower technologies as well. This is simply a tank where at night, where it's colder, the water gets cooler, and they use that rather than cooling in the daytime for their air conditioning system, saving cost and being much more efficient. One of my favorite ones, and ones that we're pioneering some new technologies in our university, is with biodigesting. At Disney, if you walk down the main street in Florida and you drop something in the trash can, you better not want it back, because there's a suction tube that takes whatever's dropped and it sorts it out, and the recyclables go one area and everything else goes in this biodigester, producing 5.4 megawatts of energy just from the waste on their main street. And they created a new solar farm. Now, I don't have any idea why they chose this shape, but it's producing 5.4 megawatts of solar as well. The third area for planetary boundaries is biodiversity loss. And every region of the world has a species that is more critically endangered or drawing attention to others. Where I live, it happens to be the sea turtle. 6 of the 7 sea turtles nest in Florida, and every one of those 6 is either threatened, endangered, or critically endangered. And working with the tourism industry, we have a program called Tour de Turtles, where last year we had 14 turtles in the race from several different Caribbean nations, and Florida, we put a tracker on them. I literally got to go to Cuba and catch 2 green turtles to put the satellite trackers on, and then when they all get released, we start the race, and then 90 days out, whoever has gone the furthest wins the race. But each turtle races for a cause, and school children throughout the world follow these, and it's a great education thing as well. Sustainable seafood is another opportunity that we are missing, I think, in many ways. And our project that you saw a little bit in the video is taking $1 billion sustainable seafood system and trying to add a lot of value in the value chain. So we're looking at all of the components, the groceries, the restaurants, the farms, which parts can go to pet stores, how veterinarians can use it, how we do aquaculture, omega-3 processing, fish meal, and so forth, to create a new economy. So with the mullet in a historic Cortez fishing village, where in the past 90% was thrown away, we're now looking at creating that even to less than 10% waste. And we do that through these change processes and innovations. And my time's getting low, so I'm going to skip through that. But we want to preserve cultural heritage, which new aquaculture design, taking the prize mullet and making batarga with that to have this added value change. Enlisting research and nonprofits as partners, new processing techniques, new culinary artistry, training the ticks, new ways to process the omega-3, and new ways to collaborate with our university and other programs so we can share that knowledge around the world. And Disney has done the same thing with sustainable seafood festivals. The Guy Harvey Rumfish Grill is maybe the leader. They have what's called the Wild Caught program. When you go in and you get one of these tags, when your fish comes to your table, it'll tell you when you scan it on your smartphone who caught it, when it was caught, where it was caught, what it was that it was caught, and how it was caught, all right there. I'm going to skip over the restoring the habitat, only to say that there's models we have for wetlands restoration that are unequaled in the world. And I want to close with one example of a futuristic resort that is scheduled to open in the next couple months. Reducing plastics, I have to throw in that piece there because that, we may have by 2050 now more plastic by weight in the ocean than we do fish. That's how serious that threat has become. And our nitrogen and phosphorus overload is not only creating the pollution, 80% of it from land, it's the major cause of our 400 ocean dead zones. We've got to decrease those by promoting more local things. Our sustainable seafood systems, I've mentioned in the video already, the model we have going in Anna Marie Island, so I won't spend any time going into the details of that, other than to say that we also couple that with energy efficient buildings besides just the solar system, and these are hurricane resistant to 250 miles an hour, 30 edible gardens along the main street that inspired many local gardens as well. And we have a program for invasive species for wild pigs and lionfish as well. And so I'll conclude by sharing this one model that is coming up for a new resort called the Disney Village Nature Eco Resort. They have voluntarily set targets to have zero carbon emissions from day one, zero waste to landfill, sustainable transportation with no cars allowed in the village, sustainable water never going into the aquifers, even in the off-growing season to maintain a local sustainable food source of a minimum 28%, building with local sustainable materials, protecting natural habitat and wildlife, preserving cultural heritage, creating local partnerships and ensuring fair trade, and having the theme of this resort, quality of life and well-being. I did a presentation a year ago at Windsor Castle and took a side trip to Stonehenge. And on that tour, the guide said, a lot of people are still debating how they move these 30-ton stones from Wales to the site where they are. They don't know how that happened or how they erected them. But he said, what was more remarkable than moving the stones was getting people to cooperate. They had all these tribal warfare going on, and somehow they created a culture of peace for this whole building, this project. Somehow they found a way to feed the families and the workers that were taking on this project. And he pointed out, this is a lesson from the past. It's been done before, and we can find the ways to to do it again so we can preserve our planet Earth. Thank you.